you something about the menstrual cycle. All right. So menstrual cycle, as we all know, occurs in a female. So I'll just start with the steps that happen. What happens exactly? So the first thing that happens, the first day, day one. If you say day one starts with the menses. All right. Day one is where the bleeding occurs. So menstrual cycle. So the first step is menses. Menses occur, and the bleeding will occur. And along with that, there is also what happens is the formation, the small follicles in the ovary that is present, the small follicles, they'll grow into bigger size. Right, they are developing, so it's also called the budding phase. It's very simple, the easiest phase. Next, what happens is called the proliferative phase. There are two steps that occur. It's also interchangeable sometimes, a follicular stage, sometimes it's called a follicular stage. It's called a follicular stage, also called a proliferative phase sometimes, but it's actually two different things. So proliferation means development. Like I've written development. Proliferative phase means the development of the endometrium. This is the endometrial layer of the uterus which develops, all right? Since in the menses, all the endometrial layer was shed out, now the body has to build it up again. So this is where the proliferation occurs. That means the development occurs. Along with that, what happens is also the follicular stage. Follicular stage, this is what happens. What happens is there are different hormones in the body, we know. The pituitary glands secretes two hormones, the FSH and the LH. These two are called gonadotropins. All right, these two hormones are called the gonadotropins. So the main function of the FSH hormone and the LH hormone we'll learn. So what does the FSH do? FSH, it is secreted from the pituitary gland. It will stimulate the ovarian follicle. All right, it will stimulate the ovaries and it will produce estrogen. We know there are two main hormones in the female body, that is the estrogen and the progesterone. So FSH will stimulate the ovaries to secrete estrogen. Now the main function of the estrogen is what? Estrogen will help in, it will help in the growth of the endometrium, all right, along with the progesterone also, but we'll learn later. The ovarian follicles, what's it doing is it'll secrete the estrogen because of the FSH. Now it will produce estrogen and it will help in development of the endometrium. The next what happens, the pituitary is also stimulating the pituitary is also producing LH hormone. LH means the luteinizing hormone. FSH is the follicle stimulatory hormone. LH hormone, what it does, it level, as you can see in the photo, the level of LH will slowly increase. You see here, when it reaches this phase, right? This is the LH hormone. This pink one is the LH hormone. It's increasing, and when it reaches a peak like this peak is called the LH surge. LH surge, okay. LH surge, it's called LH surge. What happens is, like, when there is a sudden rise of LH, there is a sudden rise of LH. What happens? The Graafian follicle will split, and it will give out the secondary oocyte and the corpus luteum. Now you may ask, what is the Graafian follicle? So I'll just tell you what the Graafian follicle is. As the these follicles are growing, no, as these follicles are growing, that is, the follicles are present inside the ovaries. So this is one ovary and this is one ovary. Say these small things are the follicles. Okay, small things are the follicles. All right, just wait a minute. Yes. So what the body does is secreting FSH. Another function of FSH is also to help in development of the FSH. Like I said, FSH is helping in like I said, FSH is helping in ovarian follicle development. So what it does, it helps in these follicles development. So what the body will do is it will randomly pick out one of these follicles. It will be a random process from either one of these ovaries. It may be this one or this one. It can either select any one of these ovaries and it will help in growing this. All right, it will randomly develop. It will grow, it will keep on growing, and when it becomes a certain specific size, this is the largest follicle called the Graafian follicle. Get it? This is the Graafian follicle. The largest follicle is the Graafian follicle. Okay, now what it is doing, LH is LH there, like I said, LH surge will occur here. LH surge, and then the Graafian follicle will develop because of the LH surge. And during this LH surge, the Graafian follicle will split into two. It's forming the secondary oocyte and the corpus luteum. Now, what is the secondary oocyte? Secondary oocyte, it's is the basically what we call the egg. It will fuse with the sperm to form the zygote. All right, this will come later. Now we go to the corpus luteum. Now, what is corpus luteum? Again, the graphene follicle has split. The main important part is the secondary oocyte, but the other important part is the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, luteum. The meaning of the word luteum is yellow. Okay, it's because it's yellow in color. So, what the main function of the corpus luteum is? It secretes progesterone. So, it secretes progesterone, which is the other important hormone in the female body. So, what progesterone does? It will also help in development of the endometrium. So basically, to help in endometrial growth, we need both estrogen and progesterone. All right, both of them will need. Without the estrogen, the progesterone cannot work. So E and P helps in development of the endo. That much you should remember. Now the endometrium will grow and it'll have a suitable environment for implantation of the newly formed zygote. So when this secondary oocyte, it fuses with a secondary oocyte, fuses with the sperm, it will help in formation of a zygote. Now zygote will go and implant in the suitable environment, that is the endometrium. It will go and implant in the endometrium. All right, this much. Now the main two very important things, corpus luteum and corpus albicans. Now what happens? The corpus luteum is growing. Corpus luteum secretes more amount of progesterone. If the conditions are unfavorable, it will become corpus albicans. Albicans, the meaning of the word albicans is white, because it's white in color. All right, so it will produce less progesterone. Now we'll learn the fates of different structure in the menstrual and ovarian cycle. So endometrium, what will happen? There may be two things that can occur in the endometrium. All right, so let's see if the conditions are favorable and if the conditions are unfavorable. What does favorable mean? Favorable means that there is fusion of the secondary oocyte and the sperm, and there is conception. Basically, a baby will be formed. All right, the zygote is formed, which will later implant. All right, so if it's favorable, endometrial will keep growing. Endometrial will keep growing, and it will support the pregnancy. But if the secondary oocyte is released, and if there is no implantation, if there is no fusion of the egg and there is no conception, then the conditions are unfavorable and there will be menses. Next, what happens to the corpus luteum? Corpus luteum, which we know was yellow in color. Remember, luteum means yellow. What will happen again? The favorable and unfavorable. If the conditions are unfavorable, if the conditions are favorable, what will happen? More and more increased number of progesterone will be secreted. Increased number of progesterone is secreted, and it helps in supporting the endometrium. So the main function, another important function of progesterone is to help in sustaining a pregnancy. Okay, so if it is unfavorable, what will happen is this corpus luteum will turn into corpus albicans. So the yellow will become white in case of unfavorable, and there will be low progesterone. The progesterone goes on decreasing and decreasing, and later it degenerates. Basically, it dies off. All right, dies off. Now the functions of the pituitary hormones we learn. Pituitary hormones and the other hormones are there in the body. Two important hormones that we learn. These are pituitary hormones are also known as gonadotropins. Gonadotropins. All right. So what happens is there are two main hormones, FSH and the LH. FSH is a follicle stimulatory hormone. It will help in stimulation of the follicles, which will help in producing the estrogen also at the end. So the smaller follicles, it will keep growing, and finally form the graphene follicle. And this will help in formation of the graphene follicle, basically the FSH. And also it helps in production of estrogen. So the two main functions, graphene follicle development and estrogen. So this is the function of the FSH. These two are the main functions of the FSH. Function of the LH. Function of the LH, we learn that when there is a surge in LH. So this is the level of LH, and slowly it's increasing, and suddenly it will peak and suddenly it will drop off. So on the 14th day this happens. All right, in the 14th day of the cycle, we count the cycle from number 1, the day of menses. 14 is when the ovulation will occur. All right. So this is where the LH peak occurs. So the LH peak, what will happen because of the LH surge, they will be breaking the graphene follicle. Basically, it explodes, you can say. It breaks and it will form the secondary oocyte and the corpus luteum. All right, the corpus luteum again, it produces progesterone. So we get the two important hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone. So this is called a positive feedback because FSH helps in stimulate production more and more number of FSH, more FSH, there will be more estrogen, more LH will lead to production of more progesterone, all right? But it's not the same for the opposite. More estrogen, what happens, sorry, more progesterone, what it does, it gives a negative feedback. Progesterone gives a negative feedback to LH, and progesterone also gives a negative feedback to FSH. Negative feedback means what? Negative feedback means if the progesterone increases, it will give a signal to the pituitary in the brain that you should stop producing. There is a lot of progesterone in my body. You should stop producing these hormones. And slowly, what happens since progesterone, as we know, increases in pregnancy. It's a hormone of pregnancy, progesterone. So what happens in pregnancy? Since because of this negative feedback, the level of FSH, and LH, it tends to decrease. All right. This is the ovarian cycle along with the menstrual cycle.